As I begin this morning, I think about a gentleman in one of my congregations when I first got started. Seemingly every week I'd step up to greet him and he would say, "Now don't hold back on me, preacher. Don't hold back on us this week." And sometimes I had a tough message. I would say, "Not sure you really mean that this morning." Jesus had some tough words this morning about what defiles us. And so we're going to dive into this. As always, we need some context. Think about what we've traveled these past couple weeks. Jesus had fed the 5,000. We took a side trip. It didn't cover Jesus walking on the water and calming the storm, but he had fed the 5,000 in Matthew. Then he had calmed the storm. Well, the walking on the water happens, and the word is out, friends. And you see, before we get to this scripture, the scribes and the Pharisees had traveled a long way to give Jesus the what for. What's going on, Jesus? Your disciples don't wash their hands before they eat. And so that was the showdown between Jesus and the Pharisees. And I sort of feel bad for the Pharisees, really. They were clearly outmatched. They come to give Jesus the what for, and he turned the tables on them right quick. And Jesus replies to their rebuke when they said, "Why do your disciples break the tradition of the elders by not washing their hands?" And so then Jesus replies, "Why do you break the commandments of God for the sake of your tradition?" Turned it right back on them. And then he quoted the words of Isaiah. "They honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain they worship me, teaching human precepts as doctrines." And once again, the folks supposed to be in the religious know are in front of Jesus, and they just don't get it, friends. They're outmatched. They don't understand the message of Jesus. And so now we can kind of move on, but as we move on, the disciples come to Jesus and say, "You kind of upset them." And I love the Message translation where we studied in Bible study. Jesus just shrugged it off. By now, he's used to this, people not getting what he is saying. So he just shrugs it off, and he goes on. But now it's story time with Jesus again. What a friend we have in Jesus. So Jesus now calls the crowd to them, and he says two things, friends. He says, "Listen," followed by "understand." So Jesus really wants people to listen what he's about ready to say. He says, "Listen and understand." And he proceeds to give this example of how God's kingdom is different than man's kingdom. He said, "Wash your hands or not. Really doesn't matter. That's not what defiles you." And so there was the lesson, and it was hard. And the disciples have told what they're discussing. And they're offended. The Pharisees are. And I think it's interesting when the disciples told Jesus, were they afraid maybe? Oh, he's made the Pharisees mad again. Or were they really trying to give Jesus a heads up? "Hey, Master, they're really upset. This time, you really upset them." Don't know. But we know that Jesus does shrug it off. It's old hat for him. And again, it's this theme of those who should know do not know. And then Jesus says this other thing. He says, in response to the rebuke, "Every plant that my Father in heaven did not plant will be uprooted. Leave them be." Now, that's sort of strong, isn't it? Leave them be, as if there's no hope for them. They don't get it. We're going to let them wallow in understanding. Leave them be. To me, that evokes a feeling of hopeless. Jesus says it's hopeless. They are blind folks being led. Blind folks leading other folks, and all of them will fall into a pit. And it's sort of right there that I was questioning in Bible study, who's blind? Remember, I told you, if you come to Bible study, I'm going to ask some questions. Who's blind? The blind leading the blind, but out in the world, don't we have a bunch of people doing this? I'm right, you're wrong, this is my truth. The question is that truth rooted in the teachings of Jesus Christ? So the question I would have is, who's blind out in the world, friends? And what's in folks' heart? And then Peter. I also feel sorry for him. Peter always asks the question that everyone else is thinking, but only he's the only one that has the guts to ask it. Now, I had a seminary friend like that. Kristen and Maddie are laughing because they know who it is, but I thank God for my friend who always asked the question I was thinking, but I didn't want to be the one to ask the question. But my friend always did, and then we always learned together. So when I read these stories of Peter, I think, oh, he's asking the questions most of us ask. But he's saying, Jesus, you got to explain this to me again. You got to explain this. We don't understand this. Explain it to us. And then Jesus' reply, we also had a really good laugh and study this week if you look at the Message translation. Now, we didn't love the word as it was translated, but basically Jesus said, are you being willfully ignorant? Is how Eugene Patterson said it. Like, are you trying so hard to not get this message? Because think about all that they have seen. Think about all that Jesus had done with the feeding of the 5,000 and calming the storms and the healing. Why don't you get this still? And that was his reply. But Jesus was graceful. He took another crack at it, albeit with an example containing a sewage reference, but that was the second crack at it. And I envision Jesus probably sitting on a stump some days just with his head in his hands and saying, come on, guys, come on. How many times I got to tell you this stuff? Why don't you understand this? But he takes another crack and he says, can't you see what you eat goes into your mouth, into your stomach, and then it goes out into the sewer? And what goes out of the mouth proceeds from the heart, and that's what defiles. And then look at the examples Jesus gives. Out of the heart come basically stuff from the Ten Commandments. Murder, adultery, theft, lying, sexual immorality, all that was said is to reference back to the Ten Commandments, not all these other laws they're trying to oppress people with. Back to the Ten Commandments. So friends, I ask another question. What's in our hearts? What's in our hearts? Ask it another way. What are you feeding your mind and your soul? Because I'll say it this way. When I used to lead people in retail, the way they taught us that we would have to make something go from our head to our heart and to our hands. That you have to learn the message, then you'd have to believe the message, and only once you believed it, you could take it out and sell whatever it is we were going to do because you had to believe in it. But I think it starts with what we're filling our brain with, then proceeds into our heart. You know, your parents said, if you keep hanging around with those people, you're going to start acting like them. Birds of a feather flock together. What are you feeding your soul with, friends? Because what goes in our mind goes into our heart. And if it's not pure, friends, that's what will defile, and that's where we get in trouble. So I was thinking about this. I have a little illustration if it works here. So I was at a sales seminar a long time ago, and the speaker got up and he was talking about, what do we feed our mind? Positive in, positive out. He said, y'all have heard of dental floss, but what you really need is some mental floss. You got to clean that stuff out. Garbage in, garbage out. Positive in, positive out, friends. Get you some mental floss. So, what are you reading? What are you studying? Is it rooted in the teachings of Jesus? The negative out and get you, again, extra Jesus. But what about this Canaanite woman? Seems sort of odd that story's just sandwiched in with this. You're talking about Jesus talking about what defiles, and then we see the Canaanite woman. It seems sort of like an odd interaction, doesn't it? And as was pointed out in the kids' moment, Jesus' reaction was sort of odd. I didn't come to save you. Very un-Jesus-like, and I have read so many papers about this, and the answer is, friends, we don't know. Some scholars will try to say Jesus was having a bad day. Isn't he allowed to have a bad day? He was human. Others say that what he said was so out there that maybe he was trying to prove a point. Sometimes you say something that's sort of silly just to get someone's attention. It's also sort of important to think about what the disciples said. Send this woman away. She's bothering us. Also not very graceful. So who knows why Jesus replied the way he did, but he clearly said what he said. I didn't come to save you. but she wasn't going to give up. And I think what's interesting is, remember I've said a couple times, those who were supposedly in the religious they were in the club, they didn't know. She comes up and says, Son of David, Lord, calls Jesus by his right identity. So the woman who's apparently on the outside sees what everybody else cannot see. She knows that Jesus is the source of healing. She rightfully calls him by his rightful title. So once again, we see in the Bible so beautifully constructed. Those who are supposed to know don't get it. Those who are on the outside, we have to believe that she was marginalized every day of her life because she wasn't in the club. Jesus healed her. Why? Because her faith healed her. The disciples, even after all they had seen, they need more of an explanation. But she got it, friends. And so, as I learned in every paper that I wrote in Old Testament, my professor would always say, so what? So what does this mean for us, this lesson today? Friends, we need a checkup in both our thinking and what is in our heart. Is it full of what Jesus said, or is it full of stuff that is not what Jesus said? Are we adding extra stuff in there? And friends, first day of seminary, when it was said to me, and I just offer it to you, it's a simple statement, but my dean said, you're now a public theologian, act like it. I know y'all didn't go to seminary, but y'all are Christians, so people are watching. Now I get it, it's not fair. We have a bad day and the whole world judges the church people. I get it. That's not right. Church is full of hypocrites. I said, that's okay. Come on. We got room for one more. You know what I'm saying? Like, come on. It's not right what people do to us. But what we say does matter. And what we say results from what is in our heart. And is it full of Jesus? Number 3 is the truth is always Jesus. It's not all that other stuff out there that people are making up. So we need some mental floss, friends. All right? Get that stuff out of there. The best you can say is what I'm going to say, what I'm going to type, what I'm going to write. Is it graceful? Does it do no harm? Does it shine the light of Jesus to others? And if it doesn't, friends, it took me a long time to learn this. You don't have to say it or type it. You really don't. You can hit delete. Once again, I'm just struck. So going back to that initial thing where the guy said, don't be easy on us, Pastor. Friends, what we say matters. And I am just struck at how many times Jesus continues to tell the disciples and the religious leaders the same stuff, and they don't get it. He even tells them, listen and understand, and they still don't get it. And so let us get it, friends. Love God and love neighbor with all of your heart, soul, strength, and mind, and don't be adding other stuff to it. And do that with all of your soul and all of your might. Extra Jesus is always the answer. Positive in, positive out. More of Jesus, less of us, friends. Peace and blessings to you all.